I'm Jessica Reynolds, 29 years old, and I grew up believing poverty was my destiny. For 7 years, I saved every penny, worked multiple jobs, and sacrificed everything to buy my dream home. The day of my housewarming party, I set out plates for my parents and siblings, prepared their favorite foods, and waited. Hours passed, and they never showed up. The empty chairs around my dining table told me more about my family than words ever could. Before I dive into my story, let me know where you're watching from and don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. I never thought my housewarming party would turn into one of the most important lessons of my life. I grew up in a small town called Millfield, where the divide between the haves and have-nots was as clear as the railroad tracks that split the town in two. My family lived in a cramped two-bedroom apartment in the Pinewood complex, the kind of place where the walls were thin enough that you could hear the neighbor's TV through them, and the water sometimes came out brown from the tap. My parents worked constantly, Dad at the paper mill and Mom cleaning houses for wealthy families, but we were always just one paycheck away from disaster. I shared a bedroom with my sister Amanda and brother Ryan. Our room was so small that our 3 twin beds took up nearly all the floor space. We had a system for getting dressed in the morning. One person would stand on their bed while the others changed below. Personal space was a luxury we couldn't afford. When I was 9, I became friends with a girl named Allison Parker at school. She lived in one of those big houses on Oakwood Drive, the neighborhood where all the doctors and lawyers lived. The first time I went to Allison's house for a playdate, I felt like I had stepped into another world. Their home was a 2-story colonial with pristine white pillars and a circular driveway. Inside, each member of her family had their own bedroom, and there was a formal dining room that they only used for special occasions. They even had a room just for watching TV, separate from where they entertained guests. I remember standing in Allison's bedroom, which was bigger than the one I shared with my siblings, staring at her canopy bed and walk-in closet filled with more clothes than my entire family owned combined. That was the moment I made a promise to myself: someday, I would have a beautiful home of my own. When I got home that day, I excitedly told my mom about Allison's house and how I wanted a home like that someday. Mom was folding laundry on our sagging couch, looking tired after cleaning other people's houses all day. "People like us don't get houses like that, Jessie," she said, not unkindly, just matter-of-factly. Better to be realistic about these things. Her words stung, but they also ignited something in me, a determination to prove her wrong. My father wasn't much help in our financial situation. Though he worked hard at the mill, a significant portion of his paycheck went to the local bar, the Rusty Nail. On paydays, he'd often come home late, smelling of cheap whiskey. Mom and Dad would argue about money while we pretended to be asleep. These arguments became the soundtrack of my childhood. Despite our circumstances, I found ways to nurture my dream. At 12, I started keeping a scrapbook of home designs. I'd cut pictures from magazines Mom brought home from the houses she cleaned, discarded copies of Architectural Digest and Better Homes and Gardens. I'd spend hours arranging these images, imagining what my future home would look like. My scrapbook became my escape from our cramped reality. High school was challenging for kids like me. Millfield High served both sides of town, which meant the economic differences between students were on full display. My clothes came from thrift stores or were hand-me-downs from cousins. I was the poor kid in many of my classes, especially in the advanced placement courses I fought to be in. There was a particular incident in junior year that still burns in my memory. I was invited to a study group at Bridget Williams' house, another beautiful home in the nice part of town. Someone spilled soda on my only pair of jeans, and Bridget offhandedly said, "Don't worry, just throw them in the trash and buy new ones tomorrow." The room went quiet. Everyone knew my situation, though we never talked about it. I smiled tightly and said I'd wash them when I got home. That night, I stayed up late washing my jeans by hand in our bathroom sink and drying them with a hairdryer so I could wear them to school the next day. I graduated high school with honors and a partial scholarship to State University. College was a constant juggling act between classes, studying, and working part-time jobs to cover what my scholarship didn't. I worked at the campus bookstore, delivered food on weekends, and took notes for disabled students for extra cash. sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. It was during a required elective class on interior design that my childhood interest in homes evolved into something more substantive. Professor Larson noticed my enthusiasm and encouraged me to channel it. Homes aren't just about aesthetics, Jessica, she told me once after class. They're about creating spaces where life happens. The right home can change how people feel about themselves. Her words resonated deeply with me. I didn't just want a nice house to prove my worth. I wanted to create a space that reflected who I was becoming, not where I came from. This realization gave my childhood dream a new dimension and purpose. While other college students partied or took spring break trips, I worked and saved. Every decision I made was filtered through the lens of my goal. Would this expense bring me closer to or further from my dream home? Most of the time, the answer led me to save rather than spend. By the time I graduated with my marketing degree, my dream of homeownership wasn't just a childhood fantasy anymore. It had evolved into a concrete goal with a plan attached. I may have started with nothing, but I was determined not to stay there. After graduation, I landed an entry-level position as a marketing assistant at Meridian Advertising in the city, about 40 miles from Millfield. The starting salary wasn't impressive, $38,000 a year, but it was steady work with benefits and potential for growth. On my first day, while other new hires were planning happy hour outings, I was researching the best high-yield savings accounts and calculating how much I would need for a down payment on a modest home. I created a budget so strict that my coworkers thought I was either crazy or in some kind of financial trouble. Every dollar was accounted for, every expense justified. I opened a separate savings account labeled Home and set up automatic transfers of 40% of each paycheck. Living on the remaining 60% meant sacrifices, major ones. My first apartment was a 400-square-foot studio in a part of town most people avoided. It had bars on the windows, questionable neighbors, and a communal laundry room where machines were perpetually broken. The rent was $650 a month, significantly less than what my colleagues paid for their trendy downtown apartments with rooftop pools and fitness centers. That difference went straight into my home account. My frugality extended to every aspect of my life. I meal prepped every Sunday, bringing lunch and sometimes dinner to work. Coffee was brewed at home and carried in a thermos. My phone was always at least 2 generations behind, kept until it completely stopped functioning. Clothes were bought only when absolutely necessary, usually from clearance racks or thrift stores. Weekends weren't for relaxation, they were for earning extra income. I worked Saturday mornings at a local bookstore, did freelance marketing projects in the afternoons, and walked dogs for neighbors on Sundays. Every extra dollar earned went directly into my home account. Friends and coworkers often tried to persuade me to join them for dinners out, weekend trips, or concerts. "You only live once, Jess," my coworker Megan would say. "You can't take that money with you when you die." I'd smile and say I had other plans, not wanting to explain that my plan involved eating ramen at home while researching property values. In my tiny apartment, I kept a savings thermometer on the wall, a visual reminder of my progress. Each month, I would color in another segment, watching it slowly rise toward my goal. There were times when the progress seemed painfully slow, when I'd calculate that at this rate, it would take 15 years instead of 7. During those moments of doubt, I'd flip through my childhood scrapbook, now expanded to include more realistic housing options within my eventual budget. The 3-year mark at Meridian brought an unexpected promotion to junior account manager with a salary increase to $52,000. That night, I allowed myself a rare splurge, a bottle of $12 champagne instead of my usual $5 wine, to celebrate. The next day, I recalculated my budget and increased my automatic savings transfer. The raise didn't change my lifestyle, it just accelerated my timeline. In the 4th year of my saving journey, a health scare nearly derailed everything. What I thought was a persistent stomachache turned out to be appendicitis. Even with health insurance, the surgery and brief hospitalization left me with $4,300 in medical bills. I was devastated watching a significant chunk of my savings disappear, but I had no choice. This setback added 6 more months to my timeline. To recover financially, I made the difficult decision to move back in with my parents for 2 months during my recovery. It was the first time I'd lived at home since college, and the experience was tense. Mom constantly hinted that I should just settle down in Millfield, get a local job, and find a nice apartment nearby. Dad seemed uncomfortable with my ambition, making comments about city people and their fancy ways. Ryan, now working at the same paper mill as Dad, seemed to resent my education and career. Amanda, who had gotten pregnant right out of high school and was raising 2 kids with her on-again off-again boyfriend, would make passive-aggressive remarks about how some people had it easy because they didn't have responsibilities. Those 2 months reinforced why I needed my own home, not just any home, but one that represented the life I was building for myself, separate from the limitations of my upbringing. I left earlier than planned, even though it meant stretching my budget even thinner. By year 5, my savings had reached the halfway mark. I celebrated this milestone by allowing myself one luxury purchase, a decent mattress to replace the lumpy second-hand one I'd been sleeping on. That night, lying on my new mattress, I allowed myself to truly believe that my dream was within reach. The final 2 years of saving were both the hardest and the easiest. Hardest because I was exhausted from the constant sacrifice, from saying no to vacations and outings, from working 7 days a week for years on end. Easiest because the end was in sight, and each month brought me tangibly closer to my goal. When I finally reached my savings goal of $60,000, enough for a down payment, closing costs, and a small renovation budget, I stared at my bank account balance in disbelief. 7 years of sacrifice, of wearing the same clothes until they wore out, of never eating at restaurants, of working every weekend and holiday. 7 years of putting a dream above everything else. That night, I called a real estate agent and scheduled my first home viewing for the following weekend. As I hung up the phone, I realized I was trembling. The journey that had begun with a 9-year-old girl visiting a friend's nice house was about to enter its next chapter. The house hunting process was nothing like the HGTV shows I'd occasionally allowed myself to watch at the laundromat. There was no perky realtor showing me 3 perfect options, no instant decision, no commercial break before the big reveal. Reality was messy and far more disappointing. My realtor, Diane Thornton, was a middle-aged woman with a pragmatic approach that I appreciated. With your budget and the current market, we need to be realistic, she told me during our first meeting. You'll likely be looking at homes that need some work, possibly in transitioning neighborhoods. Our first day of viewings took us to 6 different properties, each more depressing than the last. One had water damage so severe that mushrooms were growing in the bathroom. Another had an electrical system that Diane described as a fire waiting to happen. A third was situated directly across from a junkyard. Maybe I should wait longer, save more, I told Diane after a particularly disheartening viewing of a house where the previous owners had apparently allowed their 15 cats free rein. The market's only getting more expensive, Diane replied. And interest rates won't stay this low forever. Let's keep looking. Sometimes you have to kiss a lot of frogs. For 3 months, we looked at houses every weekend. I'd take Friday afternoons off work, sacrificing precious vacation hours, to view new listings before other buyers got to them. The real estate market was competitive, and anything decent in my price range would receive multiple offers within days. I made offers on 2 properties, only to be outbid both times by buyers offering cash or waiving inspections, risks I couldn't afford to take. After the second rejection, I sat in my car and cried from frustration. 7 years of sacrifice, and I was being shut out of the market by investors and flippers with deeper pockets. It was Megan who encouraged me not to give up. Over our rare lunch out, her treat for my birthday, she listened to my house hunting woes. You've come this far, Jess. The right house is out there. Maybe you need to look where others aren't looking. That weekend, I asked Diane to show me properties that had been on the market longer than 30 days, the ones other buyers were overlooking. There's usually a reason they're still available, she warned, but agreed to compile a list. The 5th house on our Sunday tour was on Maple Street in a neighborhood called Oakdale. It wasn't the prestigious Oakwood where Allison had lived, but it was a stable, mixed-income area with tree-lined streets and a community feel. The house itself was unassuming from the outside, a 1930s craftsman style with faded blue paint and an overgrown yard. "This one's been on the market for 63 days, Diane explained as we walked up the cracked concrete path. "The owners passed away, and their children just want to sell it as is. It's structurally sound according to the inspection, but it's dated," I finished for her as we stepped inside. That was an understatement. The interior looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. Mustard yellow linoleum in the kitchen, wood-paneled walls in the living room, ancient shag carpeting upstairs. The wallpaper in the dining room featured roosters and cows. But beneath the outdated finishes, I could see the bones of something beautiful. The house had character, crown molding, hardwood floors hiding under the carpet. I peeked at a corner, a charming bay window in the front room, and built-in bookshelves flanking the fireplace. The kitchen was small but had a breakfast nook with a window seat. Upstairs were 3 modestly sized bedrooms and a bathroom with vintage black and white tile. As I walked through the rooms, mentally removing the paneling and dated fixtures, I felt something I hadn't experienced in any of the other houses, a sense of possibility. This wasn't just a structure, it was a canvas. "The asking price is below your budget," Diane mentioned cautiously. "But it needs a lot of cosmetic work." "Cosmetic I can handle," I replied, running my hand along the solid wood banister. "I want to make an offer." An elderly man was working in his garden next door as we were leaving. He introduced himself as Walter Green, a retired teacher who had lived in the neighborhood for 40 years. When I mentioned I was considering buying the house, his face lit up. "The Hendersons were wonderful neighbors for 30 years, he said. "Marion was known for her garden out back, won the garden club prize several times. Harold built that treehouse in the backyard for their grandchildren." He pointed to a weathered wooden structure in the large oak tree behind the house. "This neighborhood could use some young blood. Too many of us old-timers left." His words sealed it for me. This wasn't just a house, it had a history, a story. And maybe it could be part of my story too. My offer was accepted within 2 days, $178,000, slightly below the asking price of $185,000, with no competing bids. The inspection revealed no major structural issues, just the expected problems in an older home: outdated electrical panel, aging water heater, windows that needed resealing. All manageable within my renovation budget. The closing process was a blur of paperwork, signatures, and anxiety. What if the loan fell through at the last minute? What if some catastrophic problem was discovered? What if I was making the biggest mistake of my life? On closing day, I sat at a long table with Diane, the seller's agent, and a title company representative. When I signed the final document and was handed the keys, I felt oddly anticlimactic. 7 years of sacrifice for a moment that took less than an hour. That evening, I drove to my new house, my house, and sat alone in the empty living room as the sun set, casting long shadows across the wood-paneled walls. The house was eerily quiet, with only the occasional creak of settling wood and the distant sound of a neighbor's lawnmower. I had done it. I had defied my mother's prediction that people like us don't get houses like that. I had my own home. That first night was a mixture of pride and terror. Pride in what I had accomplished, terror at the responsibility I now faced. What if the furnace broke in winter? What if the roof started leaking? There was no landlord to call, no parent to ask for help. It was all on me. I slept on an air mattress in what would become my bedroom, surrounded by the few boxes I had brought from my apartment. The house's unfamiliar noises kept me awake: the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the radiators, the occasional mysterious thump from somewhere upstairs. But beneath the anxiety was a profound sense of achievement. This was mine. All mine. The next few months were devoted to renovations on a strict budget. I took a week of vacation time to tackle the most critical projects. First priority was removing the shag carpet to reveal the hardwood floors beneath. They needed refinishing, but they were solid oak with beautiful grain patterns. I painted over the wood paneling with light colors to brighten the rooms, learned how to patch plaster from YouTube videos, and spent weekends scouring thrift stores and estate sales for furniture and decor. A mid-century dresser for $40 became my TV stand after some sanding and new hardware. Vintage curtains found at a church rummage sale added character to the living room for just $15. The kitchen was the biggest challenge. I couldn't afford new cabinets, so I painted the existing ones white, added new hardware, and splurged on butcher block countertops to replace the chipped laminate. The yellow linoleum was covered with peel-and-stick floor tiles in a classic black and white pattern, not ideal, but a vast improvement and within my budget. Each weekend brought a new project, and slowly the house began to transform. The dining room wallpaper came down, revealing plaster walls that I painted a soft sage green. The bathroom's vintage black and white tile was actually charming once properly cleaned, and a new medicine cabinet and light fixture modernized the space without destroying its character. The before and after contrasts were striking. The dark, dated living room became a bright, welcoming space with creamy walls and refinished hardwood floors. The cluttered, yellowed kitchen was now clean and functional with white cabinets and new fixtures. The master bedroom, once covered in faded floral wallpaper, was transformed into a serene retreat with pale blue walls and simple, elegant furnishings found secondhand. By the end of 3 months, the house was still far from perfect. The windows needed replacing, the back deck needed rebuilding, and the landscaping was a work in progress. But it was livable, clean, and beginning to feel like home. My home, reflecting my taste and the journey that had brought me here. After the essential renovations were complete and I had acquired enough furniture to host guests comfortably, I stood in my living room and realized it was time for the next step, sharing this achievement with the people who mattered most, my family. With the major renovations complete and my house finally looking presentable, I felt a surge of pride and excitement. For years, I'd imagined this moment, showing my family the tangible result of all those sacrifices, proving that dreams could become reality with enough determination. I wanted them to see that their daughter and sister had created something beautiful from nothing. The housewarming party became my new project, planned with the same attention to detail I'd given the home renovations. I wanted everything to be perfect, a celebration not just of the house but of the journey it represented. I decided on a Saturday afternoon in October, when the weather would be pleasant enough for guests to enjoy the backyard with its mature maple tree turning brilliant red. I created handmade invitations, spending an entire Sunday crafting them with cardstock and watercolor paints. For my family, Mom, Dad, Ryan, Amanda, and her 2 kids, I made special ones with pressed flowers from my newly planted garden. When I called Mom to tell her about the party, her response was subdued. "That's nice, Jessie. We'll have to see if we can make it. Your father's been picking up extra shifts at the mill." "It's 3 weeks away, Mom. On a Saturday. I really want you all to see the house." I tried to keep the disappointment from my voice. "We'll try," she said, changing the subject to Aunt Louise's gallbladder surgery. Ryan was equally non-committal when I called him. "Yeah, sounds cool. I'll check my schedule." I could hear the sports commentary on TV in the background, his attention clearly elsewhere. Amanda at least showed some interest. "The kids would love to see your new place," she said. "Tommy's been asking about his Aunt Jessie. As long as Derek can watch the kids that weekend, I'll be there." Despite their lukewarm responses, I remained optimistic. Surely they would come around once the date approached. This was a milestone event, after all. I threw myself into preparations. I deep-cleaned every corner of the house, touched up paint, and spent a small fortune on groceries and beverages. I wanted the food to be special, so I prepared family recipes: Mom's famous potato salad, Grandma Reynolds' apple cake, the meatballs Dad always requested for his birthday. Each dish was chosen deliberately, a culinary reminder of where I came from even as I celebrated where I had arrived. Megan came over the Thursday before the party to help me prepare. As we chopped vegetables for a crudite platter, she gently voiced what I had been refusing to acknowledge. "Has your family confirmed they're coming?" she asked, carefully arranging bell pepper strips on a serving tray. Not exactly, I admitted. But they know how important this is. They'll be here. Megan gave me a look I couldn't quite interpret. Jess, I hope they will. But just in case, maybe invite a few more friends? You wouldn't want an empty house for your housewarming. I brushed off her concern, but later that evening, I sent a few last-minute invitations to coworkers and neighbors. Just in case. The morning of the party, I was up at dawn putting the finishing touches on everything. The dining room table was set with my newly acquired second-hand china, name cards marking spots for each family member. Mom and Dad at the ends of the table, Ryan and Amanda along one side, the kids at the small table I'd set up specially for them. My friends would sit on the other side and in the extra chairs I'd borrowed for the occasion. By 2 o'clock, everything was ready. The food was prepared, the house was immaculate, and soft music played through the Bluetooth speaker Megan had gifted me as a housewarming present. I'd even cut fresh flowers from my garden for centerpieces, arranging them in vintage glass jars found at estate sales. At 2:30, my phone buzzed with a text from Ryan, running late. Traffic. I texted back that it was fine, food wouldn't be served until 3:30 anyway. I wasn't worried yet. By 3 o'clock, Megan and 2 other friends from work had arrived, bringing wine and small gifts. Walter from next door came with his wife, Helen, bearing a potted plant for the front porch. A few neighbors I'd invited stopped by, curious to see what I'd done with the Henderson place. At 3:15, I got another text, this time from Amanda, kids running fever. Can't make it. Sorry. Post pics. My heart sank, but I tried to stay positive. At least Mom and Dad would still come. 3:30 came and went. I kept checking my phone, expecting a message saying they were on their way. Nothing. By 4 o'clock, the party was in full swing with everyone except the people I most wanted there. I kept glancing at the door, making excuses to my guests about my family being delayed. At 4:45, Mom finally texted, car trouble. Your father trying to fix it. Don't think we can make it. Have leftovers for Sunday dinner? No apology, no acknowledgement of what this day meant to me. Just a practical question about leftovers, as if this were any ordinary missed dinner. I stood in my kitchen, staring at the message, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. 7 years of sacrifice, of working multiple jobs, of saying no to every indulgence, all to prove something to a family who couldn't be bothered to drive 40 minutes to celebrate with me. Jess? You okay? Megan appeared at my side, having noticed my extended absence from the living room. I showed her the text, unable to speak. Oh, honey. She pulled me into a hug. I'm so sorry. For a moment, I allowed myself to sink into her embrace, fighting back tears. Then I straightened up, forced a smile, and returned to my guests. The party continued, with people complimenting the house, enjoying the food, and sharing stories. From the outside, it probably looked like a successful gathering. But throughout the evening, I couldn't stop looking at the empty chairs around my dining table, the name cards for my family members serving as painful reminders of their absence. The special dishes I'd prepared sat largely untouched. Nobody at the party had the emotional connection to Mom's potato salad or Grandma's apple cake. After everyone left, I sat alone in my living room surrounded by gifts and leftover food. The house that had felt so full of potential now seemed to echo with absence. I had created this beautiful space, achieved what I'd been told was impossible for people like us, and the very people I wanted to share it with couldn't be bothered to show up. That night, I cried myself to sleep, wondering if I had been chasing the wrong dream all along. What was the point of having a beautiful home if the people you wanted to share it with didn't care enough to see it? The day after the party, I woke up with a hollowness in my chest and an anger simmering just beneath it. The plates I'd set out for my family were still on the table, untouched. The special dishes I'd made for them sat in the refrigerator, uneaten. Each physical reminder fueled my growing indignation. I tried calling Mom first. The call went straight to voicemail. I texted both her and Dad with no response. By mid-afternoon, my hurt had crystallized into determination. I wasn't going to let them brush this off with vague excuses and silence. I needed answers. I got in my car and made the 40-minute drive to Millfield, rehearsing what I would say the entire way. When I pulled up to the small house where I'd grown up, I noticed all 3 cars in the driveway: Mom's Corolla, Dad's pickup truck, and Ryan's motorcycle. So much for car trouble. Mom answered the door, surprise registering on her face. "Jesse? We weren't expecting you. Everything okay?" "No, Mom, everything is not okay," I said, stepping past her into the living room. Dad was in his recliner watching a baseball game. He nodded at me but didn't get up. "Where's Ryan?" I asked, noticing his jacket on the hook by the door. "Out back, working on his bike," Dad said. "What brings you by?" I stood in the middle of the living room, looking between them. "I want to know why none of you showed up yesterday. To my housewarming. The party I invited you to weeks ago, for the house I spent 7 years saving for." Mom and Dad exchanged a glance I couldn't interpret. Mom sighed and sat down on the couch. "We told you, Jesse. The car was acting up. Your father thought he could fix it, but..." "I saw all 3 cars in the driveway just now," I interrupted. "Looks like they're working fine." Dad shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Got it running late last night," he muttered, not meeting my eyes. "And Ryan? And Amanda? Everyone had an excuse? No one could make the 40-minute drive to see my house, the one I've been talking about for years?" Mom looked genuinely confused. "It's just a house, Jessica. We'll see it eventually. No need to make such a fuss." Her dismissal stung worse than their absence. "Just a house? Mom, I worked 3 jobs for 7 years to buy this house. I gave up everything. And you couldn't give up one Saturday afternoon?" The back door slammed, and Ryan walked in, wiping his hands on a rag. He stopped short when he saw me. "Hey, Jess. What's up?" "I was just asking why none of you came to my housewarming yesterday," I said, turning to include him in my accusation. Ryan at least had the decency to look guilty. "Yeah, about that. I meant to text you earlier, but..." "But what, Ryan?" He glanced at our parents, then back at me. "Look, do you want the truth? They've been talking about your showing off 4 weeks. Ever since you bought that house." "Ryan." Mom snapped. "What?" "It's true," he countered. "All I've heard is how Jessie thinks she's too good for Millfield now, how she's trying to be something she's not." I stared at my mother in disbelief. "Is that true?" Mom crossed her arms defensively. "You have to understand how it looks, Jessie. You buying some fancy house in the city, sending those fancy invitations, like you're trying to impress everybody." "I wanted to share something I'm proud of with my family," I said, my voice cracking. "That's all." Dad finally spoke up. "Your mother and I had planned yesterday anyway. Fishing trip with the Hendersons. Been planned for a while." "The Hendersons?" I repeated, the coincidence of the name not lost on me. "You skipped my housewarming to go fishing?" "It was Bill's birthday," Dad said defensively. "Couldn't just cancel." "But you could cancel on me." It wasn't a question. The silence that followed was answer enough. Just then, the front door opened, and Amanda walked in with her kids in tow. She froze when she saw me. "Jess? What are you doing here?" Tommy, her 6-year-old, ran to me for a hug. "Aunt Jessie. Did you bring us presents?" "Not today, buddy," I said, hugging him briefly before turning to Amanda. "Feeling better? The fever break?" Her confusion was momentary before understanding dawned in her eyes. "Oh. Yeah. Much better now." "That's interesting, since you're all here for Sunday dinner, apparently." "The dinner Mom asked me to bring leftovers to, from the party none of you attended." Amanda had the grace to look ashamed. "Jess, it's not what you think." "Then what is it?" Because from where I'm standing, it looks like my entire family lied to avoid coming to my housewarming. Amanda set her purse down with a sigh. You want the truth? Fine. It's hard, okay? It's hard watching you with your perfect job and your perfect house and your perfect life, when the rest of us are still stuck here, struggling. Perfect life? I repeated incredulously. Do you have any idea how hard I've worked for everything I have? The sacrifices I've made? Yeah, we know, Ryan interjected. You never let us forget it. Saint Jessica, who pulled herself up by her bootstraps while the rest of us are just lazy, right? I never said that. You didn't have to, Amanda retorted. It's in every conversation, every time you talk about your job or your house. Like you're better than us now. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. That's what you think? That I think I'm better than you? Well, aren't you? Mom said quietly. Always talking about your fancy marketing job, your city friends, and now this house. It's like you're embarrassed of where you came from. Of us. Tears sprang to my eyes. I have never, ever been embarrassed of you. I just wanted. I trailed off, not sure how to express the complicated mix of emotions that had driven me all these years. You wanted to prove us wrong, Dad finished for me, finally meeting my gaze. To prove you could do better than us. His words silenced the room. They were too close to the truth for comfort. Is that so wrong? I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. To want more than what we had? To believe I could have it? No, Dad said, surprising me. It's not wrong. But you gotta understand, Jessie. Every step you take away from where you started is like you're saying we weren't good enough. That's not what I meant, I said, tears now flowing freely. I just wanted to show you what was possible. I wanted you to be proud of me. We are proud, Mom said, but her tone lacked conviction. It's just different now. You're different. I had to be, I replied. To get where I am, I had to change. But that doesn't mean I've forgotten where I came from or who helped me get here. Ryan snorted. Yeah? When's the last time you came home just to visit, not to show off something new or tell us about some promotion? His words stung because there was some truth in them. In my determination to move forward, had I been leaving my family behind? And now you've got this big house, Amanda added. What's next? A husband from the right side of the tracks? Kids who'll be too good to play with mine? At what point do you just admit you've outgrown us? That's not fair, I said, but the doubt had taken root. Had my pursuit of my dream home been partly about escaping my origins? About proving I was better than? We argued for another hour, old resentments and new accusations flying across the living room. Mom cried, Dad retreated into stony silence, and Ryan stormed out at one point, only to return with a six-pack of beer. Amanda's kids played obliviously in the corner, occasionally looking up at the raised voices with wide eyes. By the time I left, we had reached no real resolution. The pain of their absence at my housewarming had been compounded by the realization that my success had created a chasm between us I hadn't fully recognized. They saw my achievements not as inspiration but as judgment, each step up I took highlighting their own stagnation. I sat in my car outside the house for a long time before driving away, tears blurring my vision. The family dynamics that had shaped me, the support mixed with limitations, the love tangled with resentment, were more complex than I had allowed myself to acknowledge. As I drove back to my beautiful, empty house, I realized that in focusing so intently on proving my mother wrong, showing that people like us could indeed have nice houses, I had missed a crucial truth: a house is just a structure. It's the relationships within it that make it a home. The week following the confrontation with my family was one of the most emotionally turbulent periods of my life. I moved through my days in a fog, going through the motions at work, coming home to my beautiful house that now felt hollow. The pride I had felt in my achievement was tainted by doubt and hurt. Had I been unconsciously trying to prove I was better than my family? Had my single-minded pursuit of homeownership been partly driven by a desire to escape my origins rather than honor them? These questions plagued me, disrupting my sleep and concentration. On Wednesday evening, my doorbell rang unexpectedly. I opened it to find Megan on my porch, holding a bottle of wine and a pizza box. "I thought you could use some company," she said. "And carbs. Carbs always help." I managed a weak smile and let her in. We settled in my living room, balancing pizza slices on our laps. "I went to see them," I said after a while. "My family. To confront them about missing the party." Megan nodded, waiting for me to continue. I told her everything, the lies about car trouble, the fishing trip, Amanda's fake sick kids, and the painful accusations that followed. As I spoke, the emotions I'd been suppressing rose to the surface, and I found myself crying again. "The worst part," I said, wiping tears with a napkin, "is that they might be right. Maybe I have been trying to prove I'm better than them. Maybe buying this house was partly about escaping where I came from." Megan considered this. "Even if that's partly true, Jess, it doesn't make what you've accomplished any less impressive. And it doesn't justify them lying to you and missing your housewarming. But what if I'd been so focused on proving my mom wrong that I pushed them all away? What if I'd been subtly condescending without realizing it?" "Look," Megan said, refilling our wine glasses, "I come from a similar background. My parents still live in the same double wide I grew up in. When I got promoted to marketing director last year, do you know what my mom said? She asked if I was getting too big for my britches." I looked at her in surprise. Megan had never talked much about her family. "There's this thing that happens in certain families," she continued. "When one person starts to succeed in ways others haven't, it forces them to confront their own choices and limitations. And sometimes it's easier to tear you down than to celebrate you, because celebrating means acknowledging what they might have done differently." Her words resonated deeply. "It's the difference between your family of origin and your chosen family," she explained. "Your family of origin gave you roots, but they can't always give you wings. Sometimes you need to find people who understand the journey you're on." Over the next few days, I found myself thinking about Megan's concept of chosen family. I realized that while I had been so focused on impressing my blood relatives, I had overlooked the supportive community I was building around me. The following week, I made an appointment with a therapist named Rebecca whom Megan had recommended. Her office was warm and inviting, with plants in every corner and comfortable seating. I felt at ease almost immediately. "Tell me about your family dynamics," Rebecca said after I'd given her a brief overview of recent events. For the next hour, I talked about growing up in Millfield, about the complex mix of love and limitation that characterized my upbringing, about my drive to prove that I could have more, be more. "What you're describing is very common in families where one member significantly changes their socioeconomic status," Rebecca explained. "It's called family systems theory, the idea that families function as emotional systems seeking balance. When one person changes their position in that system, it creates disequilibrium that the system tries to correct." "By pulling me back down?" I asked. "Or by pushing you away," she nodded. "Your success threatens the family's established narrative about what is possible for people like us. By rejecting your achievement, they preserve their worldview and avoid confronting their own choices." This framework helped me understand the tension in a new light. It wasn't just about jealousy or resentment, it was about maintaining the family's equilibrium, even if that equilibrium was limiting. "So what do I do?" I asked. "You set boundaries," Rebecca replied. "You honor your achievements without apology, but you also recognize that your family may never be able to fully celebrate those achievements with you. And that's okay. You can love them while acknowledging their limitations." At work the next day, I had lunch with my coworker James, who had recently been promoted to creative director. I knew he had a complicated relationship with his family and thought he might have insights to share. "I haven't spoken to my father in 3 years," he told me over sandwiches. "Not because I don't love him, but because every interaction left me feeling diminished." At some point, I had to ask myself, Is maintaining this relationship worth the cost to my mental health? That sounds extreme, I said, unable to imagine cutting ties completely with my family. James shrugged. It is extreme. And I'm not saying it's the right choice for everyone. But what I realized is that I can honor my origins without being held back by them. I send my mom money every month. I call my siblings regularly. But I had to distance myself from the toxicity that was preventing me from living my best life. His perspective, while more radical than I was comfortable with, offered another piece of the puzzle. Setting boundaries didn't necessarily mean cutting ties, it meant being clear about what I would and wouldn't accept in how I was treated. With these insights in mind, I decided to host another, smaller gathering at my house, this time inviting only my chosen family, Megan, James, a few other close friends from work, Walter and Helen from next door, and a couple I'd met through a home renovation workshop. This gathering had none of the elaborate preparation or emotional expectations of the housewarming. It was simply a dinner with people who supported me and valued my company. We ate takeout on my patio, drank wine, and shared stories late into the evening. Toward the end of the night, Tanya, a graphic designer from work, raised her glass in a toast. To Jessica, she said, who showed all of us what determination looks like. This beautiful home is a testament to your strength, and we're honored to share it with you. As everyone clinked glasses, I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the wine. These people saw me, really saw me, and celebrated my achievement without feeling diminished by it. Over the following weeks, I established clearer boundaries with my family. I still called weekly, still sent birthday gifts to my niece and nephew, still planned to go home for major holidays. But I stopped seeking their validation or approval. I stopped trying to impress them or change their perceptions. I accepted them as they were, with all their complications and contradictions. This new approach didn't immediately heal the rift between us, but it did make our interactions less fraught. Without the pressure of my expectations, they seemed more at ease. Ryan even asked to see pictures of the house, a small but significant step. Meanwhile, I continued to build connections with my chosen family, people who understood my journey and supported my growth. I joined a book club, volunteered at a local community garden, and even started mentoring a young woman at work who reminded me of myself 10 years earlier. Slowly, my beautiful house began to feel like a home, not because my family of origin had blessed it with their presence, but because I was filling it with authentic connections and new traditions. The empty chairs from the housewarming no longer haunted me, they had been replaced by friends who showed up, literally and figuratively. 6 months after the housewarming debacle, autumn had given way to winter and then to spring. My house had continued to evolve, but in ways I hadn't anticipated. I had initially decorated with what I thought would impress others, particularly my family, with sleek, magazine-worthy furnishings and a color palette that was more aspirational than personal. Now, I was making changes that reflected who I truly was. I painted the living room a rich teal that made me happy every time I walked in, rather than the neutral beige I thought would appeal to everyone else. I displayed my collection of vintage cameras on open shelving, hung art from local artists I admired, and created a reading nook in the bay window where I spent weekend mornings with coffee and books. My relationships with my family remained complicated. Mom and I spoke weekly, but our conversations were carefully curated to avoid sensitive topics. Dad remained distant but would occasionally surprise me with a gruff comment that revealed he was paying more attention than I realized. Saw a show about that paint color you picked. Said it was supposed to be good for creativity or something, he mentioned during one phone call, referring to my living room that he had never seen in person. Ryan still maintained his defensive posture, but the edge had softened somewhat. Amanda and I had reached a tentative truce, though we were far from the close relationship I had once hoped for. The most unexpected development came in the form of my younger cousin Lily, Amanda's 19-year-old sister-in-law. She called me out of the blue one April afternoon. "I hope it's okay that I got your number from Amanda," she began hesitantly. "I'm thinking about moving to the city for college, and I was wondering if I could see your place. Everyone back here talks about it, and I want to know what's possible, you know?" Her request touched me deeply. Here was someone from my extended family who saw my achievement not as a rejection of where I came from, but as inspiration for where she might go. Lily visited the following weekend, wide-eyed as I showed her around the house. "You did all this yourself?" she asked, running her hand along the kitchen countertop I had installed. "Most of it," I confirmed. "YouTube tutorials and a lot of trial and error." "I want something like this someday," she said. "My dad says I should just stay in Millfield, that college is a waste of money, but you want more," I finished for her. She nodded, her expression a mixture of hope and uncertainty that I recognized all too well. Over lunch, I told Lily about my journey, not just the highlights, but the struggles, the doubts, the moments I almost gave up. I showed her my old budget spreadsheets and explained how I had prioritized long-term goals over immediate gratification. "It's not easy," I told her honestly. "And there's a cost that goes beyond money. But for me, it was worth it." By the end of her visit, I had offered to help Lily research scholarships and prepare college applications. She had become an unexpected bridge between my past and my future, a reminder that my journey could serve as a beacon for others even if it had created distance with some. As Thanksgiving approached, I made a bold decision. Rather than returning to Millfield for the holiday as expected, I invited everyone to my house. "I'll cook," I assured Mom when she expressed skepticism. "You won't have to do a thing." To my surprise, Dad was the first to accept. "Been curious about this place," he admitted gruffly. "Might as well see what all the fuss is about." Mom followed his lead, and eventually Ryan agreed to come too. Amanda declined, citing prior commitments with her in-laws, but promised to visit at Christmas. I spent weeks preparing, not with the desperate need for approval that had characterized the housewarming, but with a genuine desire to share my home with my family on my terms. I planned a traditional meal with a few contemporary touches, set up the guest room for my parents, and arranged for Ryan to sleep on a new pull-out couch in my home office. The day before Thanksgiving, I received a package delivered to my door. Inside was a hand-carved wooden sign reading "The Reynolds Home," clearly made in someone's workshop. A note in my father's unmistakable blocky handwriting said simply, "Thought your house needed this. Dad." I stared at the sign, running my fingers over the carefully routed letters. It wasn't an explicit apology for missing the housewarming, but in my father's language of actions rather than words, it was an acknowledgement of my achievement and, perhaps, a small step toward healing. I hung the sign by my front door just before they arrived, a symbol of the careful reconciliation we were attempting. Thanksgiving wasn't perfect. There were awkward pauses, old tensions that simmered beneath the surface, moments when I caught Mom looking around my house with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. But there were also glimpses of connection, Dad examining my DIY plumbing repairs with grudging approval, Ryan relaxing enough to laugh at an inside family joke, Mom showing genuine interest in my garden plans for spring. As we sat around my dining table, the same table that had held empty chairs at the housewarming, I realized that healing wasn't about erasing the hurt or pretending it never happened. It was about creating space for new interactions, new memories that could exist alongside the painful ones. In the months that followed, I continued to strengthen relationships with my chosen family while maintaining more realistic expectations of my family of origin. Megan, James, and I started a monthly dinner rotation, hosting gatherings in our respective homes. I joined Walter and Helen next door for weekly card games, learning their stories and becoming part of the neighborhood's fabric. Lily called regularly for advice on college applications and visited whenever she could, bringing a youthful energy to my home that I cherished. Through her, I found a way to connect with my roots while still honoring my growth. The empty chairs at my housewarming had initially felt like rejection, a painful reminder of the distance between my dreams and my family's limitations. Now I understood they had made room for something I needed more, the space to build authentic connections based on mutual respect rather than obligation or expectation. My house was more than a structure I had saved for or a point to prove. It had become a true home, filled with chosen family, new traditions, and the hard-earned wisdom that comes from disappointment transformed into growth. As I sat in my reading nook one Sunday morning, watching spring rain nourish the garden I had planted, I felt a deep sense of peace. The journey hadn't gone as planned. The validation I had sought from my family had never fully materialized. But in its place, I had found something perhaps more valuable, the knowledge that I could create a home within myself, one that no one could take away. Have you ever had to redefine what family means to you? Or worked toward a dream that others couldn't understand or support? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe if this story resonated with you, and share it with someone who might be struggling with similar family dynamics. Remember, sometimes the empty chairs at our table make room for new connections we never expected. Thank you for listening to my story, and may your own home be filled with people who truly see and celebrate you.